The sharp graphite lead pressed into the top line of the fresh yellow sheet, leaving a dark, decisive mark that read, ACT2, Scene 1. Outside the cafe window, the stranger in the charcoal trench coat remained under the green canvas awning, the glowing ember of his cigarette puncturing the damp autumn twilight. Miles felt an electric surge of purpose in his chest. He was going to ride this wave of momentum to the very end of the night. He had the detective, he had the storm, and he had the midnight freight train idling on the tracks. All he needed to do was push Valerie Vance across the rail yard and into the shadows of the open boxcar. He leaned over his legal pad, his shoulders hunched over the wobbly 24-inch table, and let the play surge forward into the darkness. The switching yard at Cape Ann is a sprawling labyrinth of gleaming iron rails, wet gravel, and towering freight cars. Thick sheets of coastal fog roll inland from the ocean, mingling with the heavy black coal smoke pouring from the locomotive engine. Valerie Vance stays low, running along the narrow corridor between two rows of refrigerated wooden cargo cars. Rain lashes her fedora, but her slate gray eyes remain locked on the rusted steel stenciling painted across the side of the train ahead, Boxcar 42. The sliding timber door of the boxcar is unlatched, hanging open by 3 inches. A faint sliver of pale yellow lantern light spills out through the gap, cutting across the wet ballast stones between the ties. Valerie reaches the iron ladder, climbs 2 rungs, and presses her back flat against the exterior wooden siding. She pulls her revolver from her coat pocket, holds her breath, and slides the heavy door open just wide enough to slip inside. She lands on the splintered floorboards in a low crouch, sweeping her weapon across the interior of the car. Miles's pencil hovered an inch above the paper. He held his breath, waiting for the scene to materialize in his mind. What was inside the boxcar? He tapped the graphite against his thumbnail. Was it a line of wooden crates filled with contraband machinery? Was it a pair of federal agents waiting in the dark with shotguns cocked? Or was it the man with the olive scarf, sitting on an overturned nail keg, holding a smoking lantern? Miles began to write. Inside the shadows of the boxcar, 2 armed guards in wool jackets stand near a row of heavy wooden crates. One of them turns, raising a lantern, and shouts. Miles stopped. He read the line twice. A sharp, sour knot tightened in his stomach. It felt horribly flat. It sounded like an imitation of a third-rate radio drama he had heard 20 years ago on a static-filled AM station. 2 armed guards stand near wooden crates. It was lazy. It was generic. It had none of the strange, unsettling specificity of the real world he had just witnessed. The measured tapping of fingers on foam marble, the torn receipt with blue ink, the unbranded brass key. He tried to salvage it. He crossed out the guards and wrote, Inside the boxcar sits a lone telegraph operator, frantically typing a transmission on a portable brass key while a kerosene heater glows in the corner. No, that made no sense. Why would a telegraph operator be running an active line inside a moving boxcar on a coastal freight run? Miles gripped a mechanical pencil tighter, pressing his knuckles against the yellow pad. He had built Act 1 entirely out of stolen reality, the stranger's phone call, the woman's tense posture, the few disjointed fragments of conversation about a Monday citation and an unlatched gate. But now that those stolen scraps were exhausted, he was forced to rely on his own imagination, and his imagination was handing him nothing but hollow cliches. Come on, Miles whispered through clenched teeth. Think. What was in the crawl space? What is on the train? He tried to force another line. Valerie steps toward the crates, her gun steady, and says, Drop the crowbar, Miller. The harbor police know everything. The sentence sat on the page like a dead weight. It was awful. It was embarrassing. A wave of hot, suffocating irritation surged up his throat. Miles pressed the pencil down with furious force and slashed 3 violent diagonal lines straight through the entire page. The graphite tore through the pulp of the yellow paper, leaving a ragged scar across the lines. Rip. With a sharp, angry pull of his wrist, Miles tore the entire sheet away from the legal pad. The perforated cardboard header shed a shower of tiny yellow paper flakes across the dark tabletop. He crumpled the ruined page into a tight, hard ball in the palm of his hand and slammed it down beside his coffee cup. He took a deep, shuddering breath trying to steady his hands. "Reset," he muttered to himself. "The setting is wrong. The railroad yard is too broad. Pull the camera in." He smoothed the top of the next clean sheet. He would change the location entirely. If the train yard felt artificial, he would move Valerie into an intimate, claustrophobic setting, an underground boiler room beneath the Harbor Authority, where the true conspiracy could be unpacked through pure, raw dialogue. He positioned his pencil and began again. ACT2, Scene 1. Beneath the stone foundations of the Boston Customs House, the air is thick with steam and the sulfurous stench of coal furnaces. Water seeps steadily through the arched brick ceiling, dripping into shallow puddles across the flagstone floor. Valerie Vance descends the narrow spiral iron staircase, her leather boots ringing softly against the metal steps. In her left hand, she carries the soaked leather dispatch case containing the maritime ledger. At the far end of the vaulted cellar, illuminated by the red glow of an open furnace door, a man in a sodden wool overcoat stands over an iron workbench. He is using a pair of rusted shears to cut through a spool of copper wire. Valerie reaches the bottom step and halts in the shadow of the brick archway. "The north gate was open," Valerie says, her voice echoing off the wet masonry, "just like you promised." The man does not turn around. He sets the shears down on the iron bench and wipes his grease-stained hands on a rag. "You shouldn't have come to the customs house, Vance," he replies, his voice low and raspy. "The inspectors found the ledger's duplicate an hour ago." Miles paused, his pencil suspended over the paper. He stared at the words, "The inspectors found the ledger's duplicate an hour ago." What duplicate? What was written in the ledger to begin with? What were they actually smuggling? Was it illegal liquor, counterfeit currency, stolen architectural blueprints for a naval dry dock? He had no idea. He didn't understand maritime trade in the 1950s. He didn't know the first thing about customs house inspection protocols, and he was completely guessing at how a mid-century criminal syndicate would operate. The dialogue, which had felt so crisp and dangerous 10 minutes earlier, now sounded entirely synthetic. It was the dialogue of a man pretending to know things he had only ever read about in dusty paperback. "This is garbage," Miles muttered, a bitter sneer curling his lip. "Absolute, unadulterated garbage." He tried to push the scene forward, forcing his hand to move. Valerie steps into the furnace light. "There is no duplicate," she says. "The only record left is the one in this bag." The man turns around, revealing a scar across his left eye. Miles stopped again. A scar across his left eye? Really? Was he honestly resorting to comic book villain tropes to keep a scene alive? A surge of genuine self-disgust burned behind his eyes. He pressed the graphite tip into the paper to cross it out, but he pressed down with too much lateral force. Snap! The fine graphite lid shattered with a crisp click, the broken millimeter of carbon ricocheting off the side of his paper coffee cup and tumbling onto the floor. "Damn it," Miles growled under his breath. He clicked the top of the drafting pencil twice, extending a fresh length of lead. Then, gripping the top edge of the legal pad with his left hand, he hooked his right index finger behind the paper and jerked it sideways. "Rep." The second page tore free with a loud, violent rasp that drew a brief, curious glance from a customer waiting at the counter. Miles didn't care. He crushed the page into a mangled sphere of yellow paper, his knuckles turning white with frustration, and tossed it onto the table. It bounced off his acrylic ruler and came to rest beside the first crumpled ball. His chest felt tight, constricted by a familiar, suffocating panic. The euphoria of Act 1 was completely gone, replaced by the grim, crushing reality of his own creative bankruptcy. He had tricked himself into believing he was a genius simply because he had overheard a stranger's phone call and stolen his rhythm, but stripped of that external spark, he was nothing more than an amateur struggling in the corner of a coffee shop. "Calm down," he told himself, rubbing his clammy palms against the rough denim of his trousers. "Focus on the core mystery. What made the phone call interesting? The cipher, the 3.5-inch measurement, the Monday citation. Build the scene entirely around the code." He flattened the third clean sheet of yellow paper with the palm of his hand, determined to strip away all the melodramatic fluff and focus on pure intellectual suspense. AC2, Scene 1. The back office of the Coastal Telegraph Company is cold and sparse. A single green-shaded banker's lamp hangs over a roll-top oak desk, casting a pool of emerald light over a brass telegraph receiver and a stack of blank yellow cable slips, raindrops heavily against the high transom window. Valerie Vance stands across the desk from a young telegraph clerk with slicked back hair and wire-rimmed spectacles. She pulls the torn strip of receipt paper from her pocket and places it flat beneath the lamp. The 2 lines of vibrant blue ink glow sharply against the paper fibers. "I need this decoded," Valerie says, her tone cold and unyielding. "The cipher uses a 5-letter transposition key based on the Monday shipping arrivals." The clerk looks down at the blue ink, his throat bobbing as he swallows hard. He adjusts his spectacles with a trembling finger. I can't decode this, Miss Vance," the clerk whispers, glancing nervously toward the frosted glass door behind him. "This isn't a commercial code. This is an administrative signal from the state marshal's office." Miles froze. He leaned back, his eyes narrowing as he read the clerk's line. An administrative signal from the state marshal's office. What on earth did that even mean? How would an administrative signal be formatted? What would the actual cipher look like? Would it be a series of numbers, or a sequence of garbled Latin phrases, or a grid of nautical coordinates? Miles realized with a sickening drop in his stomach that he couldn't write the next line because he had no clue what the message actually said. He was writing a scene about a code that he himself could not conceive. He tried to fake it. Valerie leans over the desk. "The numbers mean 3.5 inches of clearance," she says. "It tells them where the false floor is built in the harbor warehouse." The clerk shakes his head. "No, you don't understand. The 3.5 inches refers to the water gauge at the tidal lock." Miles dropped his pencil onto the table. It was pathetic. He was running in circles, inventing random plot devices out of thin air just to justify a handful of overheard words that probably had nothing to do with detectives, trains, or tidal locks. The entire premise was unraveling like a cheap sweater, and with every sentence he wrote, the story grew clumsier, sillier, and more utterly detached from any semblance of truth. The creative blockage in his skull felt like a physical wall of solid concrete. The air inside the cafe felt horribly hot and stagnant, despite the rain outside. The low hum of conversations, the clinking of ceramic mugs, and the relentless churning of the coffee grinder seemed to amplify, pounding against his temples with unbearable volume. "You're a fraud," Miles whispered, his voice trembling with bitter exhaustion. "You can't even finish 3 pages without collapsing into nonsense." A sudden wave of pure, unbridled fury took over. He grabbed the top corner of the legal pad with both hands, his fingers digging into the paper until his nails cut through the surface. Rip! He tore the 3rd sheet off with such violent force that the cardboard backing of the notepad bent in half with a dull crack. He crumpled the paper with both fists, squeezing it to a dense, tight knot of yellow trash, and flung it savagely beneath the table. He didn't stop there. He looked down at the fresh 4th sheet staring back at him, clean, yellow, and entirely empty. With a shaky hand, he wrote a single line at the top, ACT, Valerie Vance walks into the dark. He stared at the 7 words. 5 seconds passed, then 10, then 30. His mind was a total, absolute void. There was nothing on the other side of that darkness. No characters, no secrets, no trains, no answers. Just a 34-year-old man sitting alone in a Brooklyn coffee shop, surrounded by balls of crumpled paper, drinking cheap drip coffee while his life passed him by. A profound, hollow despair washed over him. Miles let out a long, ragged groan that rattled in his throat. He dropped his drafting pencil, let his forearms collapse onto the wooden tabletop, and buried his face entirely inside the crook of his elbows. He sat there in the dark shelter of his own arms, breathing in the smell of his wet wool coat and the bitter graphite on his skin. His chest rose and fell in deep, exhausted, shuddering breaths. Around him, 3 crumpled paper balls sat scattered across the faux marble table like miniature monuments to his complete artistic failure. The room around him continued its gentle, indifferent hum. Outside, the steady rhythm of the rain beat against the canvas awning. Miles remained motionless, his forehead pressed hard against his wrists, desperately wishing he could simply evaporate into the floorboards. Then, the floorboard 2 feet to his right gave a low, familiar groan under the weight of a heavy leather boot. A faint draft of cold, rain-soaked air drifted across the back of Miles's neck. A tall, dark shadow fell over his table, blotting out the ambient light of the cafe. Miles did not move. He assumed it was the barista coming to clear his empty paper cup, or perhaps an annoyed customer looking for an extra wooden chair. He kept his face buried in his sleeves, refusing to look up and display his misery to the world. From directly above his head, a voice broke through the quiet hum of the room. It was that deep, unmistakable, clean baritone, calm, resonant, and standing barely 12 inches away. Need some help with that? Miles's entire body went rigid. A violent shock of adrenaline detonated in his chest. His head snapped upward so fast that his neck muscles seized in a sharp spasm, his eyes flying wide open in pure, unadulterated terror. Standing directly beside table 7, towering over the wobbly table, with his dark trench coat glistening with fresh raindrops, was the tall stranger. The man held Miles's blue plastic lighter loosely in his open right palm, extending it forward with a calm, unblinking hazel stare, his eyes resting squarely on the wreckage of torn yellow paper scattered beneath Miles's trembling hands.